Welcome to the Voice of Counseling, presented by the American Counseling Association. This program is hosted by Dr. S. Kent Butler. This week's episode is Reflections from a Creative Counselor, Dr. Samuel T. Gladding, and features Dr. Sam Gladding.
Welcome to the Voice of Counseling from the American Counseling Association. I am Dr. S. Kent Butler, and today joining me is Dr. Samuel T. Gladding. He is an ACA fellow and former president who is also a professor in the Department of Counseling at Wake Forest University. He is the recipient of numerous awards, including the David K. Brooks Distinguished Mentoring Award and the Arthur A. Hitchcock Distinguished Professional Service Award. Sam is known for his infectious humor. He is a prolific author with an extensive list of publications. So today we're going to just talk about what inspires him. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you, Kent.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing pretty well, I think. I hope you are.
I'm doing well. It's good to see you. And it's good to be a part of knowing that I'm following in your footsteps as an ACA president. And you have been instrumental in my life because of all the work that you've been doing. And the friendship that you have kind of provided or allowed to kind of flourish between you and I. And so I'm really happy to kind of be a part of who you are. To get started, one of the things I wanted to talk about was the Samuel T. Gladding Unsung Hero Award. I noticed that this was something that you generated and you put forward. And can you kind of talk about the inspiration behind that and how that all came about?
Sure. I always think that in counseling, we recognize people who've done just wonderful things. But sometimes we don't recognize individuals who've done extraordinary things and have taken no credit for it. And so this was an award that I thought needed to be funded, to be given, to be just something that counselors could aspire to if they so wished. And even if they didn't wish, that we could recognize them for what they do. So it actually came from Richard Yap and David Kaplan and a bunch of other luminaries in the profession. And I just thought, well, like most counselors, I have extra money just laying around. And
there's that humor, folks.
And so I thought, let's do it. And so I wrote them and they agreed to it. And I guess the governing council agreed to it. And it's been going on now for about a decade.
About a decade now. Excellent. Phenomenal. And the recipients, I know that you're not involved with picking those recipients as a part of the awards committee that does that, but what are some of the criteria that that they are looking for in making sure that they find the right person each year?
Really good question. And I think they're looking for a lot of things and yet nothing specific. So you can't campaign for this award.
Right.
And I'm pleased about that. So we've had just a lot of different people receive this honor. And and I don't think any of them that I know of have campaigned for
Right.
being named.
They were just nominated and they came forth.
Yeah. So it's kind of an unselfish award, an award that gives people uh, recognition, and I'm just very pleased that it continues to go on.
Yeah. So how's life been for you during this pandemic, and what's happening at Wake Forest these days?
Wow, what's not happening? And I'm sure it's the same all over the country. But we have stayed open, and of course, we've gone to virtual learning in a number of cases. Um, Although I was in the classroom uh, all all last uh, all last year, fall and spring. Um, but the uh, point of all of that is to say that we try to continue in a way that represents the best of counseling and the best of Wake Forest. So our motto is pro humanitate, for humanity,
Hmm.
and I think we've been able to stay true to that, and we've been able to um, promote counseling as such. Um, we're very much a liberal arts university
Hmm.
um, with a few PhD programs, none in counseling, unfortunately, but we're working on it. And uh, we just are basically, um, well, we're basically trying to live up to what we were founded on, which
Okay.
goes back to 1834. But who's counting?
Who's counting? So where did you get your start? How did you know counseling was going to be your the thing that helped make you the counselor that you are today, the author that you are today? Where did you get your start?
That's a really good question, and I think I didn't start out to be a counselor.
Okay.
I was going to be a minister,
Okay.
and my grandfather, for whom I was named, was a minister, and so I just grew up uh, trying to emulate him,
Mm.
and he was a really good man, and um, so I went through um, college uh, at Wake Forest,
Oh,
uh,
okay.
and not realizing I'd ever be back. Um, and then I went to Yale Divinity School, and thinking, oh, I'll probably be coming back here for continuing ed. And then my second year at Yale, I realized, oh, this isn't me.
This isn't me.
I love the school. I love the study of theology, but it just wasn't me.
Okay.
And so I'm from Atlanta originally. Uh,
Okay.
I was driving back to uh, Atlanta from New Haven, um, as opposed to my kids always say, "Where was the Old Haven, Dad?" But there is no Old Haven in the United States that I'm aware of.
All right.
Anyway, I stopped by.
Well, I grew up right outside of New Haven. I think you knew that. I grew up in Connecticut, in West Haven, Connecticut, just
Oh, did
outside
you?
of New Haven.
I knew I liked you for many reasons.
For Yale Divinity School in Kent Butler. Okay,
Yeah.
Connecticut.
Uh, well, my wife grew up that same area.
Okay.
Uh, so uh, that's very interesting. Birds of a feather
Mm.
continue to flock. Um, so um, anyway, uh, the person I stopped to see at Wake Forest on my way to Atlanta was someone I think you know. He's dead now, but it was Tom Elmore.
Okay.
And Tom was had kind of mentored me in Wake, because Wake's not a very big school. Um, and anyway, I gave him my 20 something angst, and he said, "Well, Sam, why?" He said 5 words. He said, "Why don't you try counseling?"
Oh,
I think that's
okay.
5 words. Anyway, 4 or 5, and and uh, what he meant was, "Why don't you get some counseling?" But
Oh,
I thought he meant, "Why don't you try this as a profession?"
oh, wow.
Um, he probably knew me better than I knew myself. And so I did. And it was a really good fit. And I have no regrets.
No
Uh,
regrets. So that's phenomenal that, that's kind of your pathway there, because again, what I've been trying to look at this year is how people get tapped in, and how do we tap people in, not only to leadership, but into the counseling profession, into our counseling offices as clients. And
right.
so for you to say that he tapped you in a sense to say, hey, why don't you try counseling? That's a pretty good entryway into the profession. So, but you brought so much to the profession with regards to the work that you've been doing. So I want to ask you, where did the concept originate, and when did you realize that the combination of humor and counseling worked?
Oh, really, really good. Well, I noticed initially that uh, most of my clients were not laughing their way into my office. Um, and and that sometimes I'd say something and they would laugh.
Okay.
And that was probably accidental. In fact, it was. But that they felt better um, after they had had a laugh. Um, and and so I thought, well, let's look at this. Um, and I also felt better
Okay.
after I'd had a laugh. Um, Not that counseling's funny, it's not, but uh, even the serious side of
Mm.
matters can be
You found
very.
that it calmed you?
It calmed me.
Hmm.
Yeah, it did. It brought me joy,
Okay.
uh, um, and I think since that time, I mean, I discovered it purely by accident.
Okay.
Uh, but then afterwards, I started realizing there are a lot of people who who really believe in the power of humor as well as catharsis. And
Right.
yeah, so I continue.
So, so in a way, it enhances learning,
Right?
especially for students, and also it helps clients to kind of build a rapport with their counselor. Is that how you see it most effectively working?
That and the insight that it gives.
Okay.
So there's a book, and I've forgotten the author right off. That's called um, "It's Hopeless but Not Serious."
Okay.
I think it's Paul Watzlawick, and Watzlawick basically says that when you lighten things up, you often get uh, much better insight into yourself and
Mm.
into the subject and into the matter that you're dealing with, and often find a solution.
So you've been able to kind of not only use this in your practice, but you've been able to write about it and to use it in your writing. I know that one of the books that we use at my university that is authored by you starts off with like a joke or pun or something each chapter. What inspired that, and what was your hope? How did you tie that to the chapter?
Well, I think people are hooked by humor,
Okay.
and so it used to be hooked on phonics, but
Hooked on Samuel T. Gladding. There you go.
but now it's hooked by humor,
Okay.
and um, and people enjoy a laugh,
Mm-hmm.
um, as long as you don't degrade the subject at hand. And uh, I find that yeah, that I enjoy that too, and it can even come up with silly solutions. Uh,
Right, right, right.
so
Yeah, there's so many different ways to get through to a client to help them kind of work through whatever it is that's going on. And humor does seem like a positive way to kind of go about doing it because it brings laughter to the room.
mhm.
It brings a sense of freedom, you know. And I mean, do you see it as the opposite of tears?
Wow, I see it as complementary to
Okay.
tears.
Hmm.
Um, that and sometimes we um, talk about the fact that we laughed so much we cried, uh,
Right.
and um, and so I think humor opens us up to possibilities,
Hmm.
and I love it for that reason,
Okay.
among others.
Does it ever distract?
Yes, it can,
Hmm.
um, and that's one of the drawbacks to it that
Okay.
people can think, oh,
Hmm.
well, we're just joking, and of
Right.
course, uh, humor humor is humor is not that.
Right. So what do you say to the person who thinks they're funny and they're just not, and they try to use it in different spaces? Now I'll use myself as an example, right?
Okay.
So when I first started teaching, I was having a hard time as an African American male to kind of go in and have students see me as um, I guess, competent enough to be able to show them that I knew what counseling was and how to help them learn to become counselors. And so I'm also a tall guy, 6'4", pretty good size, and a lot of times people would say, you know, I'm intimidated by you, and so that was like my entry into helping people feel comfortable was the use of humor.
Right.
So I've been able to successfully use humor, or so I think anyway. So in my mind, I think I'm doing a good job. Class laughs or somebody's laughing at something that I'm doing, but it comes at a cost because I have to now make sure that I am kind of implementing that into the work that I'm doing. So I'm wondering for you, how do you help someone recognize when they're using a gift in a good way or when it could be something that could be harmful?
Wow. Well, like much of our counseling, I'm going to depend on them to recognize it, and if they don't recognize it, then I'm going to point it out, um, and just say, um, Jim or Jane or whoever, uh, I noticed you did this. Tell me about that. Um, yeah, I almost feel like Fritz Perls uh, when I'm saying this, but it it seems to work.
Yeah.
And I think it's like the pretend technique that we often use in
Mhm.
counseling.
Mhm.
Once you pretend, you can't go back again. Uh, you can't go back to playing. Oh, I didn't know this was going to, uh, you know, do
Right.
this.
Right.
S- So yeah, I I,
That's
I,
pretty
li-
good.
I like
That's
it.
pretty good. So you like to write.
Yes.
You have, I don't know how many books and book chapters and journal articles that you have been a part of. What's your inspiration when you write? How does Samuel Gladden sit down at at the computer or however and start writing?
Well, I first of all, I have to tell you, I can't spell. Uh,
Okay,
I
well,
cannot
that's
spell.
humorous.
Uh, and so, how I ever got involved in writing, I'm not sure. Maybe I like
So,
Bible.
so who was catching the spelling errors before spell check?
I usually was,
Okay.
and, and if not me, whoever the editor was.
Right.
But
And
I
they didn't
became
turn you away, so you must have had something good on paper. Just
well,
misspelled.
I guess, and well, uh, so yeah, I wrote for uh, my college newspaper. I wrote for um, uh, the yearbook, both in high school and in college.
Okay.
Um, and I wrote for the literary magazine on humor.
Okay.
Uh, so um, sometimes I had to entertain myself. Um, and yeah, so, so that's kind of how
How it
I
all
did.
came about. And so when did it start to stick though? When did like the counseling community start seeing your work as so relevant that now you see it in many classrooms across the community?
Yeah, I think it was gradual. Um,
Okay.
when I when I first started writing for ACA publications and counseling publications, I um, I was very much in a minority, and in fact, friends said, "Don't send that in. They're just going to reject it." And
Right.
I said, "Well, bring them on."
Bring them on. All right. You had a fighting spirit.
Yeah, and uh, interestingly enough, they didn't reject it.
Mm,
Um, in fact, I kept getting requests for more of it,
okay.
and I think we all like to humor ourselves,
Hmm.
and so um, I kept writing.
Kept
Uh,
writing. Good, good. And so, of all the textbooks that you've written, I came to know you from the group books. What would you say is, what's your favorite part of counseling to write about? And on the humor aside, right? Because humor is
sure.
just a part of it at this point. But like, what would you say would be your forte? Because like I said, I came to know you from group.
Right.
And I know that you've written on other disciplines as well. But group was really something that I saw as your mainstay for the most part.
Uh-huh.
What about you?
Um, well, another thing maybe to realize is that I was not in the top half of my class. Um,
Okay.
and so uh, when uh, my fellow master's students were being offered jobs, I was sitting there, um, kind of waiting, hopefully anticipating, interviewing, uh,
Mhm.
but not really knowing. And so I yeah I thought, well, let's see where this goes, and I received just enough encouragement
Okay.
to,
Okay.
to keep writing. Uh,
Okay.
so
So that's you say that you weren't in the top half of the class. That just goes to show that perseverance and you, grades don't necessarily always tell the story
right, right,
of what somebody's prowess is or how great somebody can become. And so you're really a testament to the fact that yes, I may not have gotten the best grades, but look, the understanding of counseling and how to help people understand it better and get through it in terms of understanding how to become a counselor is more important in some cases than having an A grade.
yeah. Well, the other thing is, um, my first job out of my master's program was in rural North Carolina, and it was like I had to improvise.
You had to laugh.
Yes, I
You
did
were
have to laugh. I did have to laugh.
I'm sorry.
No,
So anybody out there from North Carolina, I'm just having humorous moments with Dr. Gladden.
yeah, we're all in this together.
We're all in
Uh,
this together.
uh, but so much of it was um, uh, improvising.
Mm,
So I would I remember saying to this young woman one time, uh, you know, you haven't said much, and I was a big Rogerian, uh, and um, and she said, "No, I haven't. I like to write, but I don't like to talk." And I said, "Well, how about this? How about you write some things next week, and let's talk about those." And she did, and and I can remember her words like they were saying, um, the words, they must come out. I feel them inside, just scurrying about, and I could almost feel an animation there that there was something she really wanted to say, but didn't know how to say it. And I actually wrote about this too, and it was true. And so people sometimes need not only to be discovered, but to be uncovered. Uh, and I feel
wow.
like, yeah, I feel like I helped her there to not be so covered up. Uh,
Wow.
so,
Wow.
uh,
That's pretty deep.
well, it was really an eye opener for me,
Mm.
and I've never uh, regretted it.
Because there's something about honesty, especially as a counselor, to help someone kind of get to know themselves, right? And so
Right.
if they can see some of that through someone kind of opening the door, um, kind of taking the blinders off, so to speak, um, even using humor to help a person kind of recognize that they have worth, that they are valuable, that they just have to get over the hump of maybe what they're dealing with and what they're going through in the moment.
Yeah, that's a good way. That's a good way to put it. And once they can begin to feel relaxed,
Mm-hmm.
then again, when we relax in any kind of situation, we're much more likely to talk, to gain insight, to just to have a good time, as
Yeah,
well as to gain insight.
yeah. So we're going to need to take a break in a few minutes here,
Sure.
but I want to come back and talk about that. Like, what have been some of your most rewarding moments working with clients, teaching in the classroom? What have been those things that have really given you the kind of spark to kind of continue on? Because there's no stopping you at this moment. I understand that you still got stuff in the work, in the hopper, to try to get out there. So when we come back, we'll talk more with Dr. Samuel T. Gladden.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you. This is The Voice of Counseling. I'm Dr. Kent Butler, and we'll be back momentarily.
Counselors help positively impact lives by providing support, wellness, treatment. We're working to change lives. We are creating a world where every person has access to the quality, professional counseling, and mental health services needed to thrive.
Welcome back. I'm Dr. S. Kent Butler, and we're continuing the conversation with Dr. Sam Gladden. So, one of the things that I picked up several years ago and got a chance to kind of use in my classes, I used it in my Introduction to Counseling course, is the Counseling Dictionary.
Oh.
How did that come about? What was the spark behind that book being created?
Well, I figured I had written so much that one of my children said, Dad, you've got all these words out there. Why don't you gather them together
Mm,
and put them in a dictionary? And I thought, hadn't that been done before? And actually, I found it. Psychology had done it, psychiatry had done it, social work had done it, but we hadn't done it
right.
in counseling. So uh, I considered it a challenge.
It's definitely a tool. Like I said, I use it as a supplemental book in my class because I really felt that students needed to know what the terms were and how to kind of go about doing that. I really believe in students becoming counselors. Can you talk a little bit about, all the books that you've written to help people get there, right?
Right.
And so in many cases, I see books as the blueprint,
Mhm.
right? I see it as this is what you need to do in order to make it. But there's a way that you have to read a counseling book, in my perspective, so that you don't become robotic,
Right.
right? You don't start asking questions that was on page 34 of the book, that was on page 188 of the book. You really are there being present with your client. And so, in your eyes, how do you see students becoming counselors without it being that they get stuck? And a lot of times they get stuck, and then there's this thing that they call I forgot what they call it now, but when when the student gets glassy eyed or whatever have you, and they feel as though they don't know what they're doing.
Right.
Again, there's a term for it, and it's not coming to mind right now, but they are not able to kind of grasp it, right? And so even when they graduate, sometimes they still haven't been able to kind of say, "Hey, I am a counselor," right?
Right.
How do you help? What do you think in your textbooks or in your teaching helps students become?
Well, I love the word you're using there, becoming,
Mhm.
because I think Gordon Allport wasn't the only one to write about that. And uh, we do become um, part of part of our environment, part of our outlook, part of our um, definitely part of our history,
Mhm.
um, and part of our mistakes uh, as well. So I uh, tell my class sometimes that I was uh, counseling this young man, and I said something, a minimal encourager, like, uh-huh.
Mhm.
And he said, uh-uh. I said, oh, crunch. I said, well, if it's not uh-huh, what is it? And he said, well, it's it's part of me, but not as much of me as you're implying
Okay.
uh, it was. So I'm always, and I know you do this, and I think all good counselors do, hopefully. But I'm always listening to how clients are affirming themselves,
Yes.
are not affirming themselves,
Mhm.
and so if it's not, uh-huh, what is it?
Mm.
And that has gone off on numerous tracks, um, which I have really loved exploring with clients.
Mhm.
So Yeah, I hope I'm making sense there.
Yeah, I think so. Because until somebody can really see themselves, and again, if we're not affirming them or we're not helping them, then they're going to be off track as well, right? So part of our job is to kind of help them see themselves. And if we can't see them correctly, then how can we provide the feedback that's necessary, whether it's a minimal encourager or not? If
Right.
we don't see them for who they are or how they're representing or how they're coming to counseling, then we can miss the mark and cause more harm than good in the long run.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, you were talking about your early days teaching and um, humor and other things, and could a 6'4" black man really uh, understand kind of
Right, right.
this thing? And of course, I'm your opposite in the sense that I'm 5'2".
I wasn't going to go there. I
Oh,
wasn't going
that's
to go there, Sam.
it's okay. It's okay. Um, uh, and uh, I don't know. I feel like we play the parts that we're given,
Yeah,
and how we play them makes a big difference
yeah,
in the life of our clients and the lives of ourselves.
right.
And
So how do you bring cultural competence into your realm? You know, you in a very real sense represent a white male counselor,
I can,
and
yeah,
and so tell me, like, how do you help your clients see beyond what I think the perception of counseling is for some people?
right, right. Um, well, I don't think I could ever represent the John Waynes of the world or the you name you name the actor,
Uh,
but or actress. Um, but what I can represent is what it's like to be me,
mhm.
um, and realizing that um, just like in Shakespeare's the Merchant of Venice. Uh, I'm kind of paraphrasing this, but there's some lines in there that uh, if if we're cut, do we not bleed? Are we not human?
Right.
And it's really important
Yeah.
to know. So um, I I try to be sensitive to the environment around me and
Okay.
to uh, kind of work with people in that regard.
Yeah, I think it's important to work with folks and to kind of see people for who they are. And I think a lot of times what happens is people go into counseling with a false sense of what it really is, right? A lot of
Right,
times they think that, oh, I've been told that I can be I can give advice really
right,
well. I can do this really well, but not recognizing that the truth of the matter is we're really supposed to soak it in, soak it up, and help and kind of take it and learn from what they're bringing to us and give it back to them in a way that they can see it, right? Our
right,
clients. And so that they can now understand how they might be kind of portraying themselves to the world and helping them to kind of work through whatever it is. Because a lot of times people think that, oh, I can just go in and fix it. Well, that's not our role. Our role is not to fix it, which the word I was looking for before was the imposter syndrome, right?
I thought that was you.
Um, and so a lot of times people get caught up in so many different things that is not a part of becoming a counselor, right? Because once
Right,
you know who you are, once you are okay with that, once you see people for who they are, then it becomes that much easier for you to help them, right? And
definitely.
so I think the work that you've done, the types of books that you have created, the opportunities that you have created through your teaching has been very powerful. Uh, when I see you at conferences, walking around, I'm quite sure you have a lot of fans, because that's what we do. Like, when I first met you, I didn't talk to you at first because you were Sam Gladding. But what's that like, knowing that you have now mentored and or helped countless number of students become counselors?
Right, right. Well, I do think we tend to put people on a pedestal. Um, I did that with Cortland Lee uh, initially,
Okay.
uh,
Well, we
and
have that in common.
um, but yeah, it's and I did it with Carl Rogers
Mhm.
um, until this is what makes it so human and so um, funny in some ways and serious in others.
Uh-huh.
Is that I once wrote an article comparing Carl Rogers and Heinz Kohut. And as you know, Rogers, of course, is Mr. Person Centered. Heinz Kohut is um, let's talk about your id when you were a kid and all
Yeah.
the
Right.
Freudian stuff. Um, but a couple of weeks after that article came out, and it came out in the big journal, JCD,
Okay.
I got this letter from um, California, and uh, I knew who it was from, where it was from. I had no idea what the content was. So I run into the house. Our kids were still pretty small, and and um, the letter, my wife said, "Open it, open." So I did, and I could look down at the bottom signature, and it was Carl Rogers. And she said, well, what'd he say? What'd he say? And said, it's not enough that I got a letter from Carl Rogers. Do you know how many people get these things?
Right.
And
Right.
she said, I want to know what he said. And so I started reading it to her. And about the third sentence, he just really started giving me down the country. And I thought, oh, wow, there's no unconditional positive regard being expressed here.
Uh-oh.
But, you put yourself out there and you take what comes back.
You take what comes back.
So anyway, the long and short of that was my saying to her, well, not everything that you intended comes back in the way you intended it to come.
You intended it to come, right?
And so, I just kind of licked my wounds.
And I guess that, you're saying something that's really important too for all of us to kind of recognize is that, when we put people up on a pedestal or we say certain things about individuals, we sometimes take away their humanness, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because you walk down the street, you see somebody that you knew or you thought you knew or a celebrity or something like that, and they do something that you think is off-putting, and then now you have this whole different look or outlook of this person when they never told you that was them in the first place.
Right.
You created this facade for them, and then they show up and they tell you, hey, I'm human.
Right. Darn.
Right?
But you're right. If we don't put them on a pedestal, then they can have a chance to be more human with us, and we with them. But once
So I hope you still have the letter. Do you still have the letter?
I do. I'm putting it out there for bid. I'm not.
And there's the humor. Yeah, I don't think Carl Rogers would appreciate that even. I mean, if he didn't appreciate the article too much, he may not appreciate you taking his letter and then putting it out there in a different way.
Yeah. Well, my wife said after, I read it, and it was pretty scathing.
Mhm.
She said, a, a couple of weeks later, he died, actually. And I told her, and she said, "Well, you had something to do with that, don't you?"
Hmm.
I said, "Honey, he was 87." Uh,
You didn't hurry it on. You didn't hurry him along.
no,
Let's put it that way.
but she said, if you hadn't written that article and he hadn't read it and his blood pressure uh, gotten up, he'd probably still be alive today.
Oh wow.
So I'm determined someday I'll write um, a letter or an
Response.
article on that,
Hmm.
but I don't think right now. Uh,
Yeah.
it's still fresh. Uh,
Wow.
so
Well,
yeah,
thank you for sharing that. That is a very personal account, and for you to share that, even how I see you and how you see yourself and how others have seen you throughout your career, um, to have someone respond that way to you also shows the humanness that's in society, in our world, our community, and that you're willing to share that um, will help others recognize that that's one person's view, but it
right.
doesn't make up the whole of who you are, or what you bring to the table.
That's true. That's really true. Um, and so we talk about our clients taking risk,
Yeah.
and and sometimes I think we need to remember that we as counselors uh, must take risk, uh, and let's see where it leads. Uh,
Well,
so
I believe your time is your time, and so hopefully it was just his time. I don't, I wouldn't put it on you, but I would say that you have a gift. You have something that you have from this person. However you want to see it, however you take it. But I have to believe that it has also helped you in your career, or helped you in how you moved forward from that point on. So I don't, I'm kind of speechless as to how to respond to that, because like, on one hand, everybody's like, Mr. Lovey-Dovey, Carl Rogers did what?
right.
And then, and to think about it in that regards. But uh, people have different ways of seeing, how somebody's putting, I guess, their mark or their stamp, or how they see them into the atmosphere. So I'm still proud of you for still writing the article, because that's how you saw it.
Yeah.
And
And I learned.
and
Uh,
you learned.
yeah, and that's good.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Thank you so much. And that brings us to the end of our time together. And I really appreciated having the opportunity to talk with you. Um, Again, the your work speaks for itself,
Oh,
and you've been shining light for counseling, and from counseling, being in the group world, the dictionary, all the writing that you've done on humor has been instrumental. And I appreciate you. And I appreciate that when I came up to you, maybe not the first time, but the second time, you knew my name. And that's who you are. You take the time to get to know people. And I appreciate that. And I'm glad that you were a guest on today's podcast. So I appreciate you.
Well, I appreciate you, Kent, and this is a real honor to be interviewed by you for a number of reasons, not only for your scholarly work, but for your leadership and for your humanity. So
Well, thank you. I appreciate you. I get that from having people like you in my life. So I thank you. I thank you so much. And from the American Counseling Association, I'm Dr. S. Kent Butler with my guest today, Dr. Samuel T. Gladding. And thank you for joining us, and make it a good day. We'll see you next time.
ACA provides these podcasts solely for informational and educational purposes. Opinions expressed in these podcasts do not necessarily reflect the view of ACA. ACA is not responsible for the consequences of any decisions or actions taken in reliance upon or as a result of the information and resources provided in this program. This program is copyright 2021 by the American Counseling Association. All rights reserved.